Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council. So we'll now resume two more department overviews, and starting with Bruce in Parks and Recreation.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. All right. We're going to have some fun. We have a lot of initiatives to talk about today, and a lot of priority setting to talk about. A lot of our initiatives are unfunded, so I anticipate there will be questions, discussion along the way as we present through this. So. The context of my presentation today. So I'm going to do the same similar kind of presentation from other departments. I will talk a little bit about what our department is involved with, our overall responsibilities in our divisions, how that impacts our quality of life, and the responsibilities of staff in working through and bringing the programs and services to Brentwood. I will then touch on a little bit about what current projects we are working on. Our capital improvement projects, projects that are in our current strategic plan that will be flow over to the next strategic planning process. And then finally, we will touch on all of the additional identified projects that have come forward through in discussions about the next 2-year strategic planning cycle. So with that, I'm going to jump right into it. Our mission statement for Parks and Rec: provide community and neighborhood services to enrich lives and to maintain facilities, infrastructure, and resources to maximize Brentwood's high quality of life. So a little bit about our department. We have 25 full-time staff. It's made up of 3 divisions: administrative division, our parks division, and our recreation division. And you can see the numbers there, 11 in Parks Division. That includes our Parks Maintenance Manager and our Park Planner and our maintenance workers. In our Recreation Division, that 9 staff includes our Recreation Manager, 3 supervisors, and Recreation Coordinators, just so you kind of have an idea of the staffing levels we currently have. So I'm going to start with Recreation. We have a very dedicated staff, both in parks and recreation, and they're involved in a lot of different things. And I will use the most recent example. If you were out at the holiday parade or the tree lighting this past weekend, you'll notice that we had a department float, and we had staff that promoted Parks and Recreation for the city. This is staff that put this together on it was their own idea. They brought this forward, and they're promoting staff. They're there celebrating with the community our holiday events and our tree lighting. So it's a very dedicated staff. They do an outstanding job. So some of the recreation services we oversee, we manage, we schedule, we operate, we program our facilities. So community center, Brentwood Family Aquatic Complex, Senior Activity Center, our sports field, athletic fields. We have now taken on the Brentwood Education Technology Center, the Tech Center, in handling agreements for use of the Tech Center at the moment. We have the Arts Commission, Youth Commission. We oversee the entire public art program. We also have joint use agreements with our school districts, where we program and schedule facilities for the schools, especially the swimming pools, Heritage and Liberty. So we have staff that are also scheduling community use of those facilities, and we also coordinate with them that joint use facility agreement. Involved in a lot of special events. So we have several that are city provided, but we also facilitate the whole event permit process. So there's a lot of involvement in that. Mobile stage and bleachers, and we now have the agreement for the Brentwood Library and Cafe as well as under the Recreation Division. So those 9 staff are involved in a lot of different things. Just a few workload indicators to kind of show some scope. It's not just those 9 staff. We are also one of the largest providers of jobs for our youth in Brentwood. So in any given year, we have between 100 and 150 different part-time jobs that we help facilitate through our programs and services. And all those positions require recruitments, trainings, supervision. So there's a lot of time and effort that goes into all of those part-time positions that are also working and providing services to our residents. Registrations, there's a little slide on here and that talks about program registration. So before COVID, we were taking in about 12,000 registrations a year. Those registrations represent an actual program someone is signing up for, either a resident or non-resident. So that's generating revenue, that's generating economic impact for our city. That's generating jobs, all of those things. So there's a lot of registration, program registration that takes place. And then finally, special events. Prior to COVID, the slide there is showing that we did 16 city-provided events and 70 or so outside events. So again, the farmers market, makers market, it's all facilitating about 80 events a year that the department is helping to facilitate, bringing people to downtown and providing gathering opportunities and events for our residents. Finally, we schedule our sports fields. So this particular slide is showing the hourly annual use of our sport field use. And the interesting thing here, if you go to the very right column, usage here in 2021 is at 17,000 annual hours. In 2019, our total showed, if I'm looking at it correctly, 11,000 some. So we are actually increasing our sports field use even during COVID. So our numbers are rising. The capacity of our fields, there's a lot of use, and we are scheduling it. I also want to note that scheduling of fields, that involves coordination with our youth sports groups. That's coordination of our own programming, city programming. It involves coordination with our maintenance department, because those fields need to be coordinated on times when they're not being cut and they're not being irrigated. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. They have to be prepped and ready for our use. So there's a lot of background work that goes into scheduling these hours, and the numbers are showing, the stats are showing, is that is increasing.
What do you have to turn people away from? Like, what's the number one ask that you're like, I don't have any more capacity?
I really don't know right now, but I mean, we do have a lot of ask for sports fields. Okay. One of the challenges we have is that certain times of the year, our fields also need to be down for maintenance. So we have seasons. Okay. And that is one of the reasons why that artificial turf long-term initiatives was put in place to be able to have year-round use of our soccer fields.
Okay.
So Bruce, at this time though, do we have any turf fields in the city of Brentwood in regards to all these locations that are being utilized?
No, we have no art. This is all natural turf fields that we have here.
And I know the discussion, and I know we're probably going to go in there later, so I don't want to go too far into this, but was to possibly bring turf fields to the Somerset fields, right? I know that's had been a discussion. I think even 2 years ago we had discussed that.
That is on our long-term list of strategic initiatives. It's not on the list for the next 2 years unless, you know, through the discussions today it comes up to be a priority.
Thank you.
But it is on the list. So other additional work. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to our parks division. So talk a little bit about just the scope of responsibility in parks. Just want to touch on that a moment. So currently we have 94 parks that are complete and maintained in our park system, and several more that are in the development and planning process, which will make that number move to over 100 in a pretty short time. 63 lighting and landscaping districts. That's a total of 585 parcels and over 180 acres that are within those assessment districts that are maintained. We also do streetscapes. So all of the streetscapes around town are maintained through our Parks Division. So when you drive around town and you see the beautiful landscaping, that's all through the Parks Division. We have 32,000 city-owned and maintained trees.
It's contracted out, it's handled through the city, but it's contracted out to be maintained by a different.
Yes, that's correct. So we have several landscape maintenance contracts that do the routine maintenance for both our parks and our streetscapes, and also for our tree maintenance as well. We have a contract that does that. But those contracts also need to be managed and maintained, and we have to coordinate with them pretty closely. We also have weed abatement sites, 252 parcels, over 200 acres of open space weed abatement, and we work with Public Works on some of that as well. And finally, 20 miles of trails within our park system that we maintain. So additional park maintenance responsibilities. That first bullet point and the last one are work orders. So we process over 6,600 work orders a year, and that is, some of that's preventative maintenance where they're work orders that are part of our routine work, and other things are things that we respond to when we get notices from the residents about things in our parks that need to be maintained. And again, this is all done by these 11 park maintenance full-time positions, and mainly the 7 or so maintenance workers that do a lot of this work. We have over 400 annual average picnic rentals a year. There have to be, those areas need to be cleaned. They need to be cleaned afterwards. There's a lot of work that goes into that. Some of the other numbers I'll just kind of show: 84 play structures that need to be inspected on a regular basis and maintained. Water features, both our interactive water features that need to be during the season, need to have daily inspections, but then also we have additional fountains that we maintain through the park system. So there's a lot that goes on into our park maintenance. In addition to this,
Bruce, could you give a quick update on the Kings Park that was referenced earlier in public comment, just what the update there is or what we're going to do?
yeah, I actually have talked to Aaron already,
Okay.
and he was aware. He was watching the meeting this morning, and so we'll follow up on that, those issues with King Park, those holes that were identified, and we'll follow up on that as well. Yeah, thank you. Some additional things with park maintenance is, I won't go through this whole slide. I just want to show that there's a lot going on. But we do have the city-owned sound walls, fences, hardscapes. So for example, if a car accident occurs and it runs into a sound wall, it's parks staff that follow up on that, make sure contractors go out and fix those sound walls. So we have contract maintenance for the landscaping, the mow and blow and the pruning, but all of the hardscape, the picnic tables, the garbage cans, the amenities in our parks, all of that is maintained and followed through with our park maintenance division. With 94 parks, there's a lot of work involved in that. So our staff are feeling quite a bit of pressure right now. We haven't added any staff in several years for either, especially for the maintenance side. And we continue to add with development more parks and landscaping.
So would that be a function of increasing that contracted service or bringing more headcount to the city? What would you be looking for there?
It's a little bit of both. The contract maintenance happens
Automatically?
automatically because we look specifically at the number of acres and the specific areas and parcels, and that's all accounted for in those contracts. The park maintenance side that our internal staff do, we have not added staff in several years. And when I say several, since I've been here 7 years, and I think it's been before that. So it's been quite a while that
Okay.
we've added additional maintenance staff.
So when we're done, I mean, I don't know where this would fall in, but there seems to be the need in every department. That's something we should probably talk about today. Like, if they're working over 40 hours a week consistently, we got to manage, like I said earlier, the work-life balance. So we shouldn't probably leave here until we can address those deficiencies in headcount.
Yeah, it's one thing that I'm trying to set the table for is when we talk about these additional initiatives too, is the people, time, and money piece of that. And with additional initiatives, we do need to have a honest conversation about capacity, because it's not just our department, but the city is feeling a lot of pressure to be able to. We love all these projects as much as the council does, as much as Brentwood residents do. We want to see all these things done, but at some point, what happens is we have to be pulled away from other routine things to be able to keep moving forward with these. So the next thing that I want to mention is we have additional projects besides the strategic initiatives. So here's some things that we've been working on. The Deer Ridge landscape improvements. As you all know, that's moved forward with the formation of an assessment district. And we're excited to be bringing this to the council in January, where the capital improvement project will move forward, so we can begin breaking ground and improving those landscape areas. So that will be coming in January back to the council. Public art spaces, we have 2 gateway projects that are currently underway, working with those artists to bring those projects forward. We have playground replacement projects that we do each year as part of our capital improvement process. So Blue Goose is ongoing and underway, Blue Goose Park. The Three Creeks Restoration Project is one. We worked with a partner to help facilitate. The Friends of Marsh Creek were very involved in this. Very exciting project in improving that whole Marsh Creek corridor. But there are still some pieces of that are not complete, so we're continuing to work with them on that. There is a bridge over Sand Creek that is targeted to be put in with new development off of Minnesota. And but there's some improvements at Sun Gold Park that we are still working with them to complete. And then improvements at the Brentwood Family Aquatic Complex is another one that we've had some capital improvement ongoing projects. That's an aging facility, so we have projects there as well. Oh, sure. So our goals for our focus area, I will just read through these. So this is part of the strategic planning goals, is to implement short-term high priority parks and recreation master plan projects, develop a plan to implement long-term high priority projects and recreation master plan projects, enhance cultural and performing arts opportunities for Brentwood, and expand and enhance recreation opportunities by increasing programming for seniors, youth, and teens, implementing adaptive recreation. So these were the goals from the previous focus area, but they still are very consistent with all of the initiatives that are moving forward or that we will be talking about today. So next I want to talk about strategic initiatives from our last strategic plan, the one we are in right now. So for Parks and Rec, as most of you probably recall, when the pandemic first hit, the city was very concerned about how that would impact the overall budget. So our Parks Master Plan short-term projects were put on hold. They were in an interim basis, they were taken out of the budget. So we lost a year on all of these projects. So on July 1st, they got put back into in the budget, and we are working towards completing these. But these projects will then fold over or roll over into the next 2-year strategic planning cycle. So I wanted to mention these because anything that we add on top of this will be additional projects when we still have some that are not complete. So these include the Creekside Park and Guerin Park restrooms, pickleball courts, expanding the hours at Sunset Park. That's a matter of opening those gates and making it available to the residents. Citywide trail enhancements and we are working with a consultant on adaptive recreation currently. And the long-term planning projects in process, the Vineyards Amphitheater, and that will be coming back to you shortly here as well, to talk about the design and the CEQA piece of that. And we recently brought a report back to the council on both the senior center expansion and the youth center development project at the tech center. So I'll talk about some of these a little bit more in detail. So the amphitheater project is an ongoing project right now. We have a consultant architect on board that is designing that process. We had our first public workshop in October. Before that, we had several stakeholder workshops. And currently, this will be going into a CEQA analysis, and the budget for this particular project is $9.5 million. That is funded through the development agreement and also through development fees from the Vineyards project. Quickly, the senior center expansion.
Bruce, just a quick question, Bruce.
Sure.
Has there, and I may have missed it somewhere, or maybe we've already done it, but was there a feasibility study on that?
On the amphitheater project?
Yes.
Yes. In fact, there has been a couple different feasibility studies over the years. The most recent one was done before the last strategic planning session, and they looked at the market feasibility of an amphitheater and provided a report on that.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry.
So the senior center expansion, this was looked at. We had a consultant come and look at the building itself and see if it could be designed and expanded. And their analysis showed that we could expand it by about 50% on the building, and the cost for that expansion will be about $2.6 million. And it's basically just pushing the building out on the front and the back sides, mostly, of the current senior center. And then also youth center development. So we also brought back to you in that report design options and cost estimates for the feasibility of turning the current tech center into a youth center. They looked at this and they came up with a couple different options. One would be to renovate the entire Las Medanas college footprint into a youth center, and that fully renovated cost came in at $5.6 million. And then they also looked at a option where we would only renovate a portion of that and use the rest of the building as classroom space, and the estimate for that was $2.9 million. And I do want to mention we recently have had some conversations with the county. There is Measure X funding that is available for East County for a youth center that the county is looking at with as much as $5 million. And when we get to our...
Isn't that already targeted for Antioch? It was, during all the discussions, it was an Antioch, it's an Antioch East County Youth Center.
Okay, it could be.
Yeah.
We've had some initial discussions with the county just to learn more about this. And so we do have a slide when we talk about financial capacity that Carrie will touch a little bit more on this, if this is a possibility for any potential funding for a youth center. And then our proposed goals and initiatives. So these are the items that have been identified by either staff or council, and I have slides on each of these that I'll walk through. But again, it's the possibility of a fireworks show for the 4th of July, coming up with a QR code program for our art pieces, and also for interesting historical buildings and interesting things around town that we could promote.
Would that be funded from the arts funding?
We have to look closer at that. The QR code for public art, yes, I think that could. The other pieces, may not be. We'd have to look at that a little bit closer.
Okay.
Sand Creek Sports Park, I'll talk about that one. The Senior Center expansion, Shady Willow Park development. So that is the that 1 acre parcel that was first identified as a fire station, and there was a possibility of adding that additional park. So we'll talk about that. Skate park and night hours lighting for the skate park. The tech center is a youth center. Also, the tech center or the community center assessed for nonprofit hub came up as a one to talk about, so we'll chat about that. Additional trail connections and our Windsor Way Community Center Park. So I have each one of these I will touch on independently. So the first one, these aren't in any kind of order. So the Tech Center and Community Center assessment as a nonprofit hub. So this is something that we would have to look at. We did not identify a funding source for this. We'd have to do some more research into what this might look like. But basically, I think that the ask was the community center or either the tech center. How do we facilitate our local nonprofits and East County nonprofits potentially, and having facilities available and to work with them? The slide here does show we do have a lot of use at the community center. It's used for parks and recreation programming. It's used by a lot of different community partners and rented by a lot of our community partners. It's also used for a lot of city internal use for department trainings, human resources recruitments. It's a joint use facility, so it's used by the school district. So it does have a lot of use on a daily basis. So we would have to look at and really evaluate that and the impacts of that if we were to consider nonprofits here. The Windsor Way Community Center Park is another one that came up.
What is, the Hive location, that was about 4,000 square feet, correct?
Yes.
And that included all of the right side of the upstairs, including I think there's 2 conference rooms in there, isn't there?
There's one conference room in the back, and then there's some offices.
Okay, so that included all of that was 4,000. And what is the square footage of the old chamber office?
I don't know off the top of my head what that
Okay.
is. But yes, so currently we are activating that space upstairs with different preschool programs. So thus the pictures that you see on here on the slide. We've taken the opportunity that was vacant space and using that space for some additional programming. We also have, on an interim basis, put some of our recreation division staff in those offices to basically spread staff out during the pandemic because our cubicles in City Hall are pretty close together, so we've spread people out. So we are activating the space, but the question is, how is that on a permanent basis activated?
What kind of redesign would be necessary to offer some privacy if there were, say, for example, nonprofits that offer some sort of counseling or personal services? Would there be the ability to have a small office space in that area?
Well, we already have some offices there, so we already have some private spaces. So it could be that no redesign is necessary. We have redesigned cubicles and things like that with working with our facilities department and public works when needed. So some of that may be able to be done internally. We'd have to just take a closer look at that.
Okay, thanks.
Now, Bruce, when it comes to the nonprofits, currently, obviously, a portion of the tech center is being utilized by nonprofits, right? So the space, do you feel that the space is more adequate when it comes to providing space and, I guess, one-on-ones and things like that? Could that be used as well if we expanded a little bit for more programs and resources there at the tech center?
When you're talking about one-on-one meeting
Like,
space,
I think, like,
private meeting space?
like if you're doing, like, let's say, a therapist or a counselor's meeting with somebody or whatever type of services are going on, do you think the the tech center, I know it's on the right-hand side. I think there's 2 programs utilizing it now where you think if we open it up to more programs, they'd be able to do those type of services?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the tech center has the flexibility to be able to be used for nonprofits or a youth center, the current setup, or if it was redesigned, you could do both of those things with it.
Does it still have all the individual offices that it did when it was the incubator?
Yes, there are still all
So
those
there's a whole bunch of office, plus there's a conference room.
yes, that's correct.
And is there still a reception area in the front?
Yes, so that footprint of the nonprofit side of the tech center has those things. That's correct. The last strategic initiative mentioned a Windsor Way Community Center Park. So this particular initiative was a community resource building, which is on that Windsor Way future park location. The location is a little over 2 acres. So this would be a multi-use community building, and the estimated cost from that last strategic planning cycle was $2 to $5 million. If the council wanted to revisit this, we'd have to take a closer look and see if that cost estimate is still in the ballpark, but it's a pretty large scope, and it would depend a lot on what that type of building would look like, the size of the building. We'd have to do a lot of community outreach and really see what that facility, what it would end up looking like for that community.
And community and nonprofit outreach, if we're looking at another building for nonprofits, would this still be utilized for more nonprofit space, or?
That's a great question, and I think that is part of the challenge here today is in setting these priorities, because we have several facilities that we are talking about, either nonprofits, community youth centers. So identifying and really reviewing what these facilities would look like, what is the target market for these different facilities. They need to be evaluated, so we're not just looking at one separately. We want to make sure that we are providing for all of Brentwood and making sure that these facilities meet that match. And the next one is Sand Creek Sports Park. So there's been a lot of discussion about moving forward with Sand Creek Sports Park. This was brought as a long-term initiative and as part of our long-term planning and strategic initiatives at our last strategic initiative session. This particular picture is one that came out of our Parks Master Plan, and out of the last strategic planning session, the target for this was $25 million. I think that number is now a little bit outdated. I think that would go up, but that number includes basically a multi-use facility and developing that top 13 acres, and that was outdoor pickleball courts, multi-use sports facilities, and a multi-use indoor recreation facility on that 13 acres. So it is a very rough estimate, but one of the things with this initiative is to talk about is if the council wanted to move forward with moving this project forward or phasing this project forward. One is how much can we afford? How much can we actually feasibly finance to bring this forward? But it sounds like there is a possibility to be able to have some funding to do this, to get this started. But then we also would need to talk about, are we doing sports fields or are we doing a facility on this site? So we would have to do have some discussion and conversations about that. And if we do not put a facility and we just focus on sports, then where does that facility go as part of the conversation?
So when we first started discussing a facility at this, and while I didn't agree with it, the idea was to have, and it didn't matter if it was this site or the old police station site or any other site, it was going to be a multi-generational site so that we could accommodate expansion for senior programs as well as create a youth center at that location. I never agreed with it. I always thought it should stay the soccer complex I mean, imagine the tournaments that we could have in town. Because if you expand this over into the flood control basin as well to utilize that area for a turf field, well, not an artificial turf field, but a field, a soccer field, that gives us even more. How much do we have in the flood basin there? How much?
So we have 13 acres as the city park location, which is the upper part.
Oh, and then
it's just
county
about
is
20 acres as the county basin.
So 33 acres there to create a soccer complex
Right.
is what it's been on the books for 21 years now. A long time. Anyway, so that, I mean, just so that the other council members understand the difference between where it was, what it came to the council during the master plan session, that this was going to be a multi-generational facility. And that was always the thought, was that we wouldn't just do a youth center, that we would do a multi-generational center somewhere in town.
That's correct, and that's consistent with what the Parks Master Plan highlights, these different facilities as well.
When it comes to the county land and the city land, that green part is the city land? That's your 13 acres?
Yes, I don't know if this slide specifically that boundary of green versus the darker color, but that would make sense. That's the boundary.
Okay.
If you, there is a fence around the county basin, but yeah, there's the 13 acres that are on the corner of Fairview and Sand Creek, and that extends out quite a ways into the park. And then the back part of that property, there's a fence around the county basins in the back.
Okay. And so you could
I don't
put
know for sure, but that would probably be about the line in
Okay.
between.
So you could do another 2 fields in like the 20 acres area?
Yes,
And you're
the
saying
idea
those-
is you wouldn't be able to use the entire 20 acres because they're in a basin, but you could do, I think, a couple of fields down below, kind of like what they have at Freedom High
Okay.
School, where they have basin fields,
Yeah.
something like that.
Okay, and you were saying those have to be grass, not turf, if they're in the basin, or could they be?
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
They'll get flooded.
Yeah, the ones in the
If,
basin
I
would
don't
have
know
to
if
be-
there's ever been water in there.
I think
but-
there has, but they have also expanded the basin up the creek. So this particular basin, I don't think gets as much use anymore.
So is it similar, like, if you're going down Fairview from this location down, and then you see to the right side, there's that homemade soccer field? You know what I'm talking about? Is that like a basin also that someone,
Yeah, that one is not actually in, I don't think, a basin. It's just additional land there where a field
Okay.
was put. But it is,
a similar kind of,
it's a similar concept.
okay,
Yeah, if you've ever been, well, I worked in the city of Manteca before I came here, and a lot of their parks have fields in the basin. So like at Woodward Park, which is a huge soccer complex in Manteca, they have several soccer fields inside their basin. So it is something that is consistent throughout the Central Valley.
okay.
And is done. Yeah, Freedom.
Okay. And is there a big cost difference between, like, how much is a turf field versus, I guess we could talk about the money later, but just a turf versus, because if we're going to talk phasing it, it'd be nice to know how much each part of it would be.
Yeah, and I don't have those specific numbers today, but today we're identifying the projects, and we're going to come back and provide more numbers. But artificial turf field in general would cost more to put in.
Okay. But they last longer, they can be used year-round, so drive revenue year-round.
Yeah, they do have their own challenges, though, because they generally have a life cycle of about 10 to 15 years.
Okay.
And then you have to add in the replacement cost into your model for your renting of fees and that type of thing, so you generate enough revenue to be able to replace those fields after a certain amount of years.
Okay. Thank you.
Question about this diagram. If there was a thought about putting some sort of facility, where would it be on here?
It hasn't been specifically identified, but I think that just the vision of this when we were talking through the last strategic planning cycle was the facility would be more on the corner of Sand Creek and Fairview, so more to my right of that, and then the fields would be more towards the basin. It would be challenging to put facilities, and you might be able to get one field. You're not going to get multiple fields because you have to have parking, you have to have room for facilities. So it'd be challenging to be able to, depending on the size of that multi-generational recreation facility, it would be challenged to get too many sports fields in addition to that facility on this site. You could have fields obviously in the basin as well.
And then the other question is, this has been on the books for 21 years. How much longer is it going to be safe from, for example, the state saying this is dormant land, we need to use it for housing?
Well, it is city-owned property, so we do
Okay.
have that. I don't know enough about that state taking land process of what that looks like. It has been identified. It is in our development fee program. It is identified in our Parks and Recreation Master Plan as a future park, and it has been identified like that for several years. So, I mean, I don't know what that process looks like for the state, but there would definitely be some pushback to our Brentwood residents if they tried to do
Sure.
something like that.
Okay,
How many
thank you.
fields do you have at Sunset?
Let's see, there's I think the it's soccer and baseball / softball. So there's at least 3 soccer fields, and then the pinwheel that is youth fields, and then the softball field as well. So there's
Okay.
several fields.
Okay, thanks.
Just a quick question, Bruce. I know that discussions around soccer has become a very big discussion now, which is great. I know that, I have family that play in Ajax and Impact, so I know soccer in the area has been really tremendous, which is great. So I think this is a great project, right? I think, obviously, we talked about it 2 years ago, as this is something as a long-term, we see this being the location, right? Because of the bypass, possible growth in that area in regards to a hotel. So I get the whole reasoning behind that. But I also know that we've had discussions around soccer and turf, and I know we've heard different presentations from Impact around even using Sunset Park and turfing that as a short term, right? And feasibility, I mean, obviously at the end of the day, as a council, we choose, right? But would it make more sense as a, how would you say, first step in regards to how much it would cost, but also being able to, because I do believe we need turf fields too. I'm very supportive of that in all sports, actually. I'm very supportive of all of that. So I know this is a very important project. I think it's going to be a wonderful project for the city of Brentwood. But as of now, do you see it more feasible possibly going with the current location that's been discussed also for a few years, right, which is Sunset Park? I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Well, the community has identified both, so I'll be diplomatic with my answer here. The community has identified both.
Okay.
We could do artificial fields at Sunset. That has been identified as a long-term initiative. I think the cost on that was still around $10 million, so it was not a cheap thing to do. This one has been sitting on the books for a long time, and we haven't seen, this was a long-term project that was put in. The artificial turf was put in. These were identified through our master plan outreach process. And the goal last time was to really, we were checking to see if the community might want to consider some kind of measure to support public safety in parks and recreation. So we looked into that. That never moved forward. So these high-ticket projects were not able to move forward. If we have an opportunity to be able to bond or finance or grant, I would absolutely love to see Sand Creek Park get started. We need to have the political will. We need to be able to have the right time, the right opportunity, and a honestly a funding source. And the funding source has been the biggest challenge
And
on this.
I agree with you on all that. I think this is a really great opportunity, right? So my thing is, though, in the current state, right, that we're in, and obviously you're saying this was the numbers that are put out there, the 25 million. Obviously, we all know if you're building anything in your homes, things are a lot more expensive right now currently. So we're probably looking at about $25 to $30 million project. How do you see the possibility, I think you mentioned one of them, of this maybe being able to get funded?
Well, one thing we'd have to do is look at funding and phasing. So if there's an opportunity where we can focus on that 13 acres, the city-owned land, maybe we see what kind of funding we have available and phase it in and start with what we can do with that city-owned 13 acres and start from there. This would be the recommendation if we can
Okay.
find the funding for it.
Yeah, no, and I'm asking too, because I know there's a huge basketball community right out here. There's a lot of different groups now, and obviously they need a facility, right? And I know the location of possibly the youth center wouldn't be able to do a basketball court. It's not built for that. I think one of the speakers said a gymnasium. I don't think that's what we're trying to do there because it doesn't have the ceiling for that. So I know even basketball is a huge thing, right? People are looking for courts and places to play that are indoor. So, because the big thing with Impact, it's become seasonal, right? They're only a certain time they could use it, and then they can't play in Brentwood because the fields are flooded or, we can't be on there as much. So I know that's why the turf is really important. But okay, thank you, Bruce. Appreciate that.
So I'm looking and it says artificial turf soccer fields cost between $550,000 to $1.2 million, and it depends on the quality of the field. So, I mean, even if we, on a high estimate of 1.2 million or even 1.5 million, just in case, with the cost of everything going up per field. So, and at this point, on that type of thing over there, it would be 2 fields. So, what, $3 million?
Yeah.
And that doesn't
the
include the
artificial
parking or
the
any of
artificial
that.
turf, I think I threw that 10 million out there. The long-term, that was included in our long-term initiatives. Honestly, because that one was not part of this, I don't have that number right in front of me, whether it was 5 million or 10 million. But we would have to look at the cost. If we were to move forward with Sand Creek Park, we would have to come back to you with some real planning of this park and what the options were to move this forward. So one thing we want to do is we want to reach out, get visioning with the community, our soccer folks, our baseball folks, those that would want an indoor facility. We need to do some additional outreach for that. But then we would come back with working on a plan to move this forward. And as one, a funding plan, and two, the vision for the specific layout for the park.
Bruce, I agree with everything that everyone has said, so I'm not going to rehash what they've said for time's sake. But we really are, as far as economic development is concerned as well. It's kind of the chicken and the egg situation that we're in. With East County in general, Brentwood specifically, but Northern California as well, the youth sports as far as an economic development tool for the community is a really significant source, not only of new funding and monies coming in, but also keeping our funding in town and the symbiotic relationship between our restaurants, our businesses, hotels. If we are wanting as a community to have a large name hotel be here, conference centers, things like that, you have to have a draw. And one of the, in my opinion, this is kind of low-hanging fruit. Many in the community are in support of it. It sounds like the full council, to some degree, is in support of something like this. It's really important to take advantage of the timing of everything. We've got new infrastructure funding coming into the state at a federal level like we've never seen before. There's funding coming in that we didn't have access to, and there's planning at a state level encouragement for communities to do these kinds of things as a result of healing from the shutdown from COVID. Everyone's wanting to be out. Sports facilities are booked. Personally, I think the opportunity to look at this is something that in this strategic planning time frame, it was significantly different 2 years ago because of everything that has happened in 2 years. The environment in the community, the environment in the state, all of that has changed. And so, you know, I think that this is a really interesting illustration in this image.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, one thing that Josh mentioned when he talked about his economic impact or economic development presentation, one of the first things he mentioned was attractions. Attractions bring economic development. You know, our parks, our facilities, and large sports complexes are attractions that hotels are looking for to be able to get their rooms, their vacancies up. So the planning of something like this, I think that our economic development team would agree would be something that our hotel businesses would be looking at when they're making decisions about where they're going to locate. Yes, the economic impact of youth sports is very significant, and Brentwood has a huge youth sports market. We have a lot of families that are involved in soccer and baseball, and it's true that a lot of them do have to travel out of town to go to tournaments.
Well, the location of this in particular, as far as businesses in the streets of Brentwood, as a community and as a city, we're always partnering with not just downtown and the businesses there, but also over at the streets. And the location of this, you know, having been a part of a sports family and having kids that went through that phase as well, a lot of times one or more of the parents will drop the kids off, and we've got ideal situation there, especially with what we're planning in the Innovation Center across from State Highway 4 here. I think that this is really something that the timing is ripe for.
Yeah, in addition to that, there's a lot of synergy here between this particular location and the streets of Brentwood as well, as far as people going to games and needing a place to eat while games are going on, or shop while they're waiting for their kids to finish a day of tournaments. That synergy would be ideal for this
And that trail is
location.
perfect. They don't even have to get in their car. They can just walk up the trail, which is ideal.
And it's a great location also, just centrally located around Brentwood as well.
If this is one of the ones that moves forward, can we get like phase 1 being the turf, the 13 acres, phase 2, the 20 acres with a couple more fields, and then phase 3, a building? Could we look at it? I don't know if those are appropriate phases.
Yeah, I think what we would do is we'd have to come back to you and let you know what that phasing plan might look like. But if the council identified fields as being like the top priority for phasing, then, you know, we would look at that. It's going to depend on the amount of funding available and just, you know, what we can do with that phasing plan.
A project like this, Bruce, let's say we all move forward with it. Like I said, I've never been in a disagreement with this project because I think it's a great opportunity, a great project. But how long out are we looking, something like this, to actually be able to move forward?
From what I understand, depending on the way we finance this, would depend on how quickly this could move. We would have to do some planning first, but if we had a plan in place to fund, I think we could move pretty quickly into that planning phase. Tim, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so if this initiative moves forward, we would come back in February with a people, time, and money analysis showing what it would take to pull this off, and that's effective July. One of the asks we could have is give us some authority and some budget to do some initial design, do some initial stakeholder outreach, get a cost estimate, a real cost estimate, not some estimate, and come back to you with what that phasing plan would look like. But two critical components are going to be what is that funding source to acquire it and then to maintain it. And we have a later slide through Carrie's presentation where he talks about, and you've seen the sneak peek, but if you want to go out for a $20 million bond, you need $1 million of debt service every year to fund those payments. So that's really something we'd have to talk about, and then that's got its own trajectory of how quickly can you get a bond in place, or if you want to go out for a sales tax measure, which election cycle do you hit? So those, a lot of variables about timing to get the funding to then move forward on the project.
I do think the Measure X is for Antioch. However, if it becomes available for Brentwood, this is youth-related. Could we use those funds for this and for the building here, if it's a youth?
Yeah, we have a slide that would talk about, it's really focused on a youth center, and,
Okay.
and I reached out to the county, and they said they've not selected a site, so we're still in the running if we have a facility or a site to build a new one. So it's really open-ended still at this point.
Okay.
So I know we're not there yet, but obviously we're going to get there at some point. Sorry we're asking so many questions,
That's all
but
right.
to me, these are two totally different things, right? When you talk about a youth center and you talk about this large sporting complex, kind of, it's two different services that you're providing, right? There's some similarities because it's youth and it's kids, but the purpose, the mission, the vision of both of them, I think, are different in a way. So I just wanted to say that because I think that going back to the possible $5 million, which I know that we're saying it's Antioch, but we're not for sure, in the Measure X is maybe a possibility because there are two different types of projects, two types of services that are be operating from those facilities. So yeah, just want to say.
And you've highlighted a real challenge that we need to prioritize. We've got several redundant type facilities between what's at Windsor Park planned, maybe the tech center, maybe Sand Creek. We've looked at maybe other city parcels where that could also be a potential project to do something. So the more we can get some direction, narrow some things down, cancel out some other options, and really laser focused, and we can really get something done. Next.
All right, we'll keep moving here. The next item is the 1 acre parcel that is across the street from Pioneer Elementary. So this is a 1 acre park that was identified as a possibility to develop into an additional park. So staff has looked at this a little bit, and the cost to construct a 1 acre park in this particular location would be pretty expensive. They came up with a real rough estimate of around $2 million. Some of the things that go into that would be, because this particular site is not surrounded by neighborhood streets, we would have to add additional parking into that footprint of the park. That would cost additional dollars to be able to put that parking lot in. And then just some basic information on how we typically do our neighborhood parks is through the development process.
So Grant doesn't have parking on it?
Pardon me?
Grant doesn't have parking on it?
This particular location, or?
Yeah.
No, there's not. On Grant Street itself, there's bike lanes on both sides, I think, but there's no parking on that Grant Street corridor that I know of. It could be that we could put some on-street parking just adjacent to this, but in talking to staff, they identified that they didn't think there was parking along the park. So we'd have to take a look at that. So the typical way that we do these types of plans for parks is through our development process. So a residential developer comes forward, they present their project, and we work with them, and parks are located within that residential development, and the developer builds those parks for us. In this particular case, the city would have to design and build the park ourselves. It's not currently located into a landscape lighting assessment district, so we would also have to look at that for the maintenance cost. We have looked at this particular site. There are several other parks within a half-mile radius. A lot of these are smaller parks, but there are several parks that are identified that are in those residential neighborhoods that are just south of this location. And in addition to that, there is the large green space that is the McCollum Trail. That makes up about 36 acres of green space, and that is located to this area as well. So those are some considerations in looking at this particular location.
I think the feedback I've gotten is that they feel like they were shafted because they got a lot of pocket parks. They didn't get real parks. So I think this is an opportunity to just give, I said this before, an extension. The other thing is, it was the right thing to do for the fire department, but we took a big park and left them with nothing, right? Like, we were not going to do anything. So it's just giving back a little bit of what we had to take away from them because of the fire station. So the trail isn't a park. If you have little kids, a trail is not where you're going to go and throw a ball with your kid. And the little pocket parks they're just not sufficient. When you have kids, you want something bigger. So I know there's other stuff around there. I just don't think it's what you want as, a stay-at-home mom hanging out with your kid. And the Pioneer parents that have talked to me are super excited about this. They are looking forward to it. They think it's great. They know they've paid, fees into parks when they buy their homes. So they're expecting a park because they were supposed to have a park behind Pioneer. So I think that's the only thing I would say to that is I think we owe them something. I don't know if it's now or, we just hold on to it to another cycle, like once we see everything force ranked. But I think sooner or later we owe them a park.
What is the amount of money that we got in lieu fees from Amber Lane?
I don't have that information in front of me. I'd have to look into that.
Okay, because that would have
particular
been
development
directly
fee.
adjacent to that, as well as we've got 2 more possible projects coming online. On the other side of Amber Lane, there's a parcel that is on Amber Lane, and then there's a parcel, or I think 3 parcels that are on between Amber Lane and Golden Hills. There's an area that's also going to be very high density there. Both of those will have to pay into, and they're all paying into LLADs too, aren't they?
Yes, those will be annexed into LADs when they come forward.
Yeah. Okay. Because that's a source of funding right there. And if, as we mentioned, if we use a circuit training type thing, there's some pretty cool equipment that's out there these days for circuit training that you wouldn't necessarily need a grass turfed area, which is expensive to have, for a smaller park to be maintained, along with, just a trail that goes around and some plants in there versus, Anyway, so that is an option of funding is those 2 other things coming online. Not right away, but they in the future will be.
Yeah. And I want to let you know, I'm not against this in any way. It's just, I'm just reaching out the facts about this particular location and the cost it would take to bring something like this forward. Absolutely, it'd be great to have a park there. But we do have other parks in that area, and there is a cost to this, moving this forward.
Are we, I don't believe we are, but maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, meeting our parks per person general plan goals?
So that's a great question. That particular ratio fluctuates a bit depending on how many residents we have and how many parks that we have accepted. The number right now is probably somewhere around 4 acres per 1,000 residents. The general plan goal is 5 acres per 1,000 residents. So we are not there. But it should be noted that those acres that are counted are those acres that are developed parks. So what's not counted from our park system in that per acre per 1,000 ratio are our trails, our open space areas, this large 36-acre McCullamy Trail green space corridor, because that's not city property, and it was not part of the development fee credit for new parks when it was put in place. So if we counted those other areas like trails, these green spaces, our open space areas, we would be meeting that number and we would be exceeding that number. So it's a little bit it doesn't tell the whole story when you look at that per acres per 1,000 residents, because it's only talking about developed green space parks that we have.
What was the intent when that calculation was created? Was the intent to include trails or not? Because we should be using the intent.
I don't think at the time the intent was to include, because it wasn't included. As
Yeah,
far as I
it's-
know, it hasn't been counted. It's been our developed parks that have been included in that number.
So our general plan commitment is not including trails, so we're still behind our general plan
Right.
commitments.
But I think there are other cities that look at that differently.
Yep, yeah.
But
But
yes,
then would we
that's
have had to
correct.
increase it above the 5 if we were going to include trails?
Possibly.
It would probably be above 5, I would think.
We would, if we included all of those other areas, we would be above 5.
Yeah.
So,
I
a
wasn't
while
done
back,
before.
oh, I'm sorry. Go
That's
ahead.
okay. So I do support the idea of this being a park. But I am curious, what other uses would you suggest for something like this size?
That's a great
If not a
question,
park.
because it is a city parcel. So if you don't make it parkland, I'm not sure what other uses you do with that right now. I mean, you could sell it for development or something else, but or we could hang on to it for a future opportunity to put a park there in the future. We don't know exactly how the innovation center is all going to come together. So I think it would make sense to hold it and see, because we have the location and that opportunity.
So
But
far,
yeah, I really don't know what other uses we'd have for it.
yeah, and that's kind of what I was hoping to bring up. But I think in looking so far at what the Innovation Center is proposing park-wise, that something like this with a circuit training area would actually be extremely beneficial for, I think, the population we're looking at, attracting the demographics we're looking at for the Innovation Center. But I have spoken to a few people that love the idea of the circulation, the circuit training. And we don't really have something that's like that in the city that I've seen anyway. And I think I love that idea.
Vineyards,
Is it yet?
there will,
not
yeah,
yet.
that has the equipment come in yet for it?
Yes, that one will have some equipment, and we do have other areas in a lot of our parks where we could do similar types of exercise, circuit training, areas in our other parks where we could put things like that in as well.
Apple Hill has it.
Yes. It's got a small, along the trail, there's some circuit.
Yeah, I think, for me, I think I definitely like the idea of this being a park, a designated park. I don't like the idea of selling it to just for some other use, whether this happens now or later. I would like to definitely see it become a park.
What do you think the feasibility might be of, if this doesn't move forward with becoming a full-fledged park during this cycle, what is the cost to put some circuit training material and leave it open green space that's accessible to the community as a park use without park things in it, or maybe putting some circuit exercise machines in there as a stopgap until there's funding for more as a park? Is that something?
I think that's feasible. We have a nice standard for what we have we want our parks to look like, so I'd be a little hesitant to put something in that doesn't have the same feel and standard as the rest of our parks. And I think the residents around there might kind of feel a little bit like, why am I not getting the full standard of a park that other residents are getting in theirs? But it is possible to do something like that. But we'd want to do something with that meets our standards, and whether it's, it doesn't need to be natural turf. There's other things you could do to make a
Native
nice
plant
circuit.
garden. It could be a native plant garden where people can come and see what kind of plants and exhibit, a native exhibit.
Yeah, I mean, there's different things that we could do, and we would probably do some outreach with the neighborhood if this were to move forward, to see what the community would like to see in this park as well.
So I pulled up the document that you sent out to us. Currently, once there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Once 8 more parks are built, which includes the Sand Creek Park and the Vineyards Amphitheater, we will we will be at 3.9 acres. So if we don't include those 46 acres, that brings us down even less. And even by adding in the Marsh Creek State Park, Bridal Gate, Parkside Villas, 35 acres from some other thing, and then the East Bay Mud Greenbelt, and the Innovation Center, we will still only be at 4.3 acres. So we are way behind what we need to have, and that's including things that aren't even on the books yet, and possibly may not be on the books for years to come if they don't get approved by the council. So we are way behind.
Yeah, no, it'll be a real challenge to meet that 5 acres per 1,000 residents with the amount of just opportunity that we have with development that's left and our identified parks that we have.
So how much in lieu fees have we been receiving?
As far as what we have is the development fee balance right now.
Well, I mean, yeah, for the balance, because, I mean, people have been paying into the in lieu fees that aren't providing all the acreage that they need or should be putting in there or don't put it in at all. So, I mean, isn't there that in lieu fee to be used to build a park?
Yeah, we'll have a slide that comes up that shows kind of funding
Okay.
sources, but the development park fee, is that part of yours? I don't know what that balance is in park development fee that we have right now. Maybe Carrie can help me with that. 4 million? Carrie's saying it's about 4 million that we have right now. And again, that goes towards not just a park like this, but we need that towards all of those projects like Sand Creek and other ones as well.
Well, no,
that we
and I was
still
just
wanna
going to
build.
say, I mean, that could go towards Sand Creek as well, which would help to bring that amount down.
Right.
All right, thanks.
But we can use more than the 4 million, like, right? We sell land that we have or whatever, and we can use that for parks. It doesn't mean that we don't have other funds available for parks, right? Okay.
That's correct.
Like,
Sorry,
he's like, should I go?
Go ahead,
go ahead, yeah.
turn it on the top.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Yes, these parks are going to be funded through a variety of sources. So the impact fees, the in lieu fees, we have about $4 million in there. Something like Sand Creek Sports Park, there's a split of how much is going to be paid for through the in lieu fees versus how much is the responsibility of existing residents or general fund, so to speak. So there's an analysis that's done on all of these sorts of things where there's multiple funding sources. So certainly we wouldn't just use the in lieu fees. There are other sources that have to be used in some cases, especially for a regional or a citywide type park that's not meant for a specific new development. That's really where you get into, well, the whole city actually has to pay for it. You can't put new development and say, well, new development caused this regional park to be needed, because it's going to be a benefit to the whole city.
What is that designation? Is it Park City USA? Like, is Brentwood a park? Is that designation for cities that have enough parks? Do you know what I'm talking about? You see signs in Brentwood, we're a Park City USA, whatever the sign
Yeah.
says. What is that?
Yeah, Playful City
Thank you.
USA, and that's through, that was through a organization that had that particular marketing strategy, so we were a Playful City USA.
Is there benefit to that other than just being able to brag?
It's just something to market Brentwood and that we are a playful city, and it has certain standards that go with it that we have met. So that's what that's about. It's about marketing Brentwood and having that opportunity to market us.
I'm sure that looks good for things like Innovation Center and all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that come with a requirement as far as acreage?
Yes, I don't know what those specific terms were.
30.5 acres is what is in the list that you sent me.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we still have a few projects to go through, so we'll keep moving, and we'll have more time to ask questions. So, and then another one is to complete our trail circulation. So, in our master plan, we have identified about 10 miles of trails to complete our whole trail circulation. About 6 miles of those trails are identified to be developed with future development, and about 4 miles of those trails need additional city funding. And generally, it's about $1 million per mile to do trails. So if we identified completing some of the trails that we could do that are not anticipated for future development, we would need about 4 miles or $4 million to do all of those. Or we could identify certain segments and identify a certain amount of money to move forward with some specific trails. We haven't identified those. We have a lot of initiatives here, so but if council wanted to move forward with this, then we could identify $4 million, all of those trails, or partial trails to get that completed.
Bruce, I do have one question about exactly what you just said. Do we know currently what portions of these uncompleted trails could be done to make a trail that is consecutively contiguous from one side to the other for people that use these trails to potentially not drive to work but ride or walk to work in town?
Yeah, so we've identified the whole circulation here, so it's just a matter in our master plan. We have them identified, and the different areas are dotted lines if they're not completed at this point. But we've identified what that is, and that trail circulation, when complete, will make that circulation complete around town as best as we can provide it. So it will allow people from all over different parts of the city to get around through the regional trail system to downtown, to the streets of Brentwood, mostly. And we also have bike routes as well that can be put on top of this to get around town. So it provides a pretty good circulation network when completed, but we do have some areas that it would be really nice to be able to finish those off.
I've hit some of those riding, and some of them you actually have to get off and carry your bike around to another
On Grant?
location. Right, exactly.
Over the railroad
That's the
tracks.
spot I was thinking about. Yes.
Yes, we'll never get over the railroad tracks. The implement trail improvements and expansion was part of our last strategic plan. And while it does say improve health and safety measures on trails, increase marketing effort to promote trails and popular loops, have we implemented that since the last?
So the piece of it about the popular loops and some trail improvements, that is in our current strategic initiative. So that was one of those short-term initiatives. That was like $37,000. So
Okay.
We're moving forward with that one right now. This is actually building the trail connections. So keep moving so we can. The next one is Tourist Art and Historical Site Program. So this is the implementation of a QR code on our public art system, on our public art, and also implementing this program in certain historical areas around town, buildings, areas of interest, etc. And an estimated cost to do something like this was $25,000 to $50,000. I think the public art funds could fund the art locations, I believe, but we'd have to look at specifically if that could fund the other portion of it.
What other historical, I mean, other than the John Marsh House and
We'd have
the
to do
women
some,
and the women's club building across
Yeah.
the street, what's left?
we'd have to do some research around town to see
Oh,
what
and
kind of
Delta
historical
Theater.
sites there are that are interesting.
But
And I
even
think
like
we would-
Sweeney's
Well, I
and
mean,
the tunnels.
Sweeney's and Caps and
Yeah.
Old Masonic Building, the story of what used to be below Sweeney's,
Yeah.
the ghost tour that used to happen. I mean, I was also, what I suggested is was thinking about restaurants that could use the QR code to put their menus up, for example, or to share a cocktail recipe or an appetizer recipe. And my thought was it would always go back to their website, not necessarily ours. So there would be less work as far as that part goes. But when I was thinking about this, I was thinking beyond just the idea of historic buildings, even though that's what inspired the idea.
This was originally through economic development, and it was kind of, we were trying to figure out where it landed.
Yeah.
So it landed with us, but we'd work with economic development and our private business community to bring something like this forward. So we would, maybe it's something we start with public art, we own those, we know how to do that, and then we can expand. So we would work with our economic development team to bring something like this forward.
Yeah, I think it has a whole lot of economic development potential for getting people connected to the Better in Brentwood site or their social media pages or, like I said, menus or whatever as well. And I think there's a lot of buildings that don't necessarily have historic, huge amount of history, but have some interesting stories behind them. So
I noticed with COVID, a lot of people went to the QR codes for menus. So when you walk into a restaurant, you don't have to look at a menu anymore. You just scan the code on the table.
All right, we'll keep moving. The July 4th fireworks event, this is another one that was brought up. So this is one where we would look at doing our own July 4th fireworks show in Brentwood. So historically, the city has done fireworks in the past. We did one for the Sunset Grand Opening. At that time, those fireworks were launched back behind by the Municipal Services Center. That area now is no longer available, or we'd have to look if there's enough space behind Sunset Park. It's possible we could launch from there. So we'd have to look at a launch site and what's feasible.
What about the top story of the garage?
Might be a possibility. We actually did kick that around as a possibility. So that's one thing we would need to look at as
It would keep people off that top of the roof there, at least that one day.
So, yeah. So a feasible launch site, we'd have to look into that. The cost for fireworks for a 15 to 20 minute show, based on some initial research we've done, is probably $30,000 to $50,000. We are right up against it for if we were to move this forward and say we want fireworks by this coming July 4th, would be very challenging because a lot of those shows are booked 9 months or their annual shows, and that's the busiest day of the year for all of our fireworks.
We have a pyrotechnic person in our IT department.
We have a recent retiree.
Oh, he's retired. Okay,
Yeah.
well, he's available.
So we'd have to do some research if we could pull this off for this year. But this is another initiative that's brought forward. I think another part of this conversation too is if a fireworks show would prevent people from shooting off their own private or their illegal fireworks that they do, we would have to work with our fire department and police department on that. There is an impact to veterans. There is an impact to animals, our pets. So there are some other implications and considerations to think about regarding fireworks shows in general. So we'd have to do a little bit more research if this is a priority the council would want us to move
I think
forward
historically too, I know I was part of the Corn Fest. I was real involved with the Corn Fest for many years, and they used to have them like on, I don't know, Friday or Saturday at the Corn Fest. I know that, because I'll be honest, I think it'd be great for us to have fireworks again. I see Oakley have them, and I'm like, man, Brentwood should have them, right? We actually started that. But in saying that, there's usually an event, which means is it going to be an event? There's going to be more expenses, right, than the 50 to 20 to 30 to 50,000, because police department, law enforcement, there becomes this whole, it's just not paying for the fireworks, right? There's going to be a whole nother budget that's going to come into that, which I'm not saying that to be discouraging, because I think that's great to have it, but there's those realities, right? People are going to want to have their booths out there. There's going to be vendors or more security. Is Parks and Rec staff going to have to work? So I'm just saying that because I know when we did it years ago, Corn Fest was in charge of all that, which took the city out of it, and they took care of the costs and, manage it themselves, kind of a thing. So just something to put out there, but I think it's great for us to bring fireworks back to Brentwood. Just how does that look?
Yeah, and that's part of that PTM piece of it, that if we were to move forward, we would have to look at staffing levels and working with the police department and our local fire department as well.
Well, yeah, and actually Harvest Time used to do their Harvest Festival the second Saturday or the second weekend in July. They didn't do it of course they didn't do it last year, and then they didn't do it the year before. But maybe, they want to take it over and that's their festival that weekend, is the the Harvest Festival. They may get more people coming down to their event, because I know attendance has been a little slow for them.
I would also be concerned, I think it's during that time we all see next door, and Facebook, and everyone about their dogs, and the veterans, people don't like them, so I think we need to hear from the public about what they want. And isn't there like a big empty piece of land over in PA1 that we could use? I mean, just a thought.
Yeah, but we don't
We don't own
that.
it.
Well, I mean, you can ask if you can rent it for a night. Just saying.
Do you know who
might
owns
want
three
to.
quarters of it?
What?
I said, do you know who owns three quarters
Yeah, I
of
know.
it?
But I'm just saying there's a big piece of land over there.
Well, that's a very valid point. At one point, I think the very last firework, I'm sorry, thank you. The very last fireworks, I believe, that the city put on, we were out at the Scortino Ranch property that the city also did not own at the time. So that's not something that hasn't been done in the past. Right.
Are we at all concerned about the fire seasons, the way they just keep getting worse and worse? I mean, I know that's a really precise science, if you will, when it comes to fireworks, and I adore fireworks, but just, I mean, with the drought and the fire.
The fire chief actually spoke to this at one of our meetings. And, yeah, to have something that is supposed to happen versus everything else around the town is two different things.
Okay.
Yeah, but that was definitely a consideration is taking a look at the drought and that as well, safety concerns. Next project is the skate park and looking at lighting to extend the hours, especially over the winter for the skate park. So there is some history on this particular concept. This was brought through the Park and Rec Commission several years ago, where they looked at lighting for the skate park, and it did also come to the City Council. At that time, there was a lot of community outreach, and it did not move forward to put lights at the park based on the concerns of the neighboring residents with the lighting and having kids skating later on into the evening. So it has been looked at once before. The cost for this, an estimate, is around $150,000 to add lighting to the park. And the considerations is we would have to do that outreach once again to see how the community would feel about putting lights on the skate park. There are also safety and security considerations to look at. If we had, for example, the skate park opened in the evening and lights on it, when it closed, it would be dark out. So a lot of skaters come, they ride their bikes, their skateboards to the park. They would be going home in the dark. So that's one thing we'd have to consider. We'd have to work with our police department as well as far as safety and security concerns. So this is something we can consider, but we do have a history of looking at this before. But we're happy to take another look and see if this is something that is feasible and would be the community would be interested in doing.
Can you tell us a little bit about the promise that was made in 2003? What was that was that like at a city council meeting, or how did that happen?
I don't have a whole lot of details back from the 2003 other than that the city council action was not to move this forward. So I think based on the history, the residents around there, there was outreach to them, and it was their residents at the time thought that lights were not going to be part of that skate park when it went in. So
Well, and there's a
that's part
brand
of the
new
history of it.
neighborhood too that wasn't there before.
And there is
So-
a new neighborhood right
And
across
that
the
one's
street.
even closer than the other homes.
And my concern is we get another dolphin park on our hands, and then you're going to be hearing about me from this one. That's my concern, is that is it too close to homes like Dolphin Park is, and are we creating an attractive nuisance ourselves if we add the lights? I don't know, just a
So-
thought.
So I don't think it's increasing the hours. I think that currently, well, maybe not currently, but before, I think after October, or beginning of November, the hours changed because it got darker earlier, right? So I don't think it's increasing the hours. It's just keeping them the same that they were before November or October. I'm not sure exactly. to keep them the same hours, just increase the lighting. There's already lighting there. This, what happens is, the lighting only takes care of one portion of the location. So I guess the ask is keeping the same hours, don't change them, because obviously I think it closes at 8, but it gets dark at 6 now, right? So just keeping it till 8 o'clock, but adding the lighting, because there's those 2 hours in the winter, the kids are not able to use it after that time. So there's probably about 3 different lights. It's more increasing the lights on a certain portion of it, right? So it's not increasing the hours, it's increasing lighting that's already existing, because there's already existing lighting at that time. And then when those shut off, obviously all the lighting would shut off. So it's not really adding, it's not putting new, what it is. It's just putting a little bit more lighting in the area, keeping the same hours. And the other thing is the shading, right? There's no shades. There's a lot of parents with little kids that sit out there in the sun, I think at 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock is just right there, and there's no shading, right? So now you got parents there with their kids, they want to sit there, but obviously it could become very hot and irritating. So I think the shading, and also not increasing hours, but leaving them the same, just increasing the lighting for the amount of hours that are there.
The difference is that during the summertime, when it's open later, there's no school. During the wintertime, when it's getting, when we go back in time, you've got kids who should be home doing their homework, not being out at a skate park till 8, 9 o'clock at night.
I'm sorry, don't cut you off.
And then the other is the shade. I was actually out there talking with a woman who's sitting in the sun during the winter time and saying, I said, "What do you think needs shade out here?" And she goes, right now, she goes, I came and sat in the sun because it was too cold in the shade, because the whole side of the side closest to the south side closest to the aquatic center was all shaded. So that was one of the things that she had said about shade structures, that, what happens during the wintertime when they want to be in the sun.
So that maybe we could have one table with no shade, and the no shade people could sit in the sun to make sure they stay warm. But regardless, when it's 104, you got little kids skating over there, we should be at least considerate to those families that don't want the sun at 100, don't want the sun when it's 104 degrees and it's not wintertime. So I think that if there's a medium, because right now currently there's no shade at any of the benches, right? So if we did one portion of it shade, the other portion not shade, for residents that want to sit in the winter in the sun, that's fine. They could sit over here, but also those people that do need shade. So I think that, and I'll be honest with you, I've gone there many times and spoken to more than one resident. So my thing is that so I think a portion of shade, no shade, but also looking at, it's like I said, it's not increasing the hours. Kids being out there, I wish that was realistic, but there are kids out there at 8 o'clock and that are still skating. My sons have been out there after 8 o'clock and they finished all their homework very early. We live literally a block away from the skate park. So my whole thing is that not increasing the hours, just increasing the lighting. That's all about it.
We don't have shade over the skate park, right? Like, there is no shade where the kids are skating?
No.
Which is the primary function of the
Councilmember
park.
Rodriguez says, we have some tables out there, would be adding
Yeah.
additional shade to some of the seating areas, so there's areas that they can get out of the hot sun.
I guess I'm just
especially in the
confused.
summer
Like, so
months.
you can have your kids skating in 104 degree, but you don't want to sit in 104 degree. That's all I was wondering.
So I'd like to just clarify one thing about the timing of the skate park. So the way our skate park is set up is it's open from dawn to dusk. So when we say it's closed in the wintertime earlier, is we have the closing times based on when the sun goes down for the different times of the year. So we looked at the whole timing of sunsets throughout the year, and we closed the gates around that dusk time. We couldn't change it every night, but we have a season that is corresponding to the sunset time, dusk for that time of the year is the way that works.
And that's for all parks with the exception of Sunset, which is open for games.
Yes, but we do have a few exceptions to that. So we do have lights on our tennis courts, and we do have lights on
On
Balfour
Balfour
Guthrie
Guthrie.
at the basketball court.
Yeah.
So we do have a couple of exceptions, but generally speaking, unless it's a recreation amenity like that, it is dawn to dusk. Now, the skate park could be considered one of those amenities that if the council wanted us to move in that direction, we could.
Do you think
Take a
we
look
could
at that.
ask the residents around the area how they feel about it? Because that's my first concern is like, again, I don't want another issue. Can we talk to them first?
I think that that kind of outreach would have to be done as part of taking a look at this.
Okay.
I mean, I know I wear various hats, but as a resident that lives in that area, I think it's very beneficial to our kids, especially when we don't have anything for them anyways. Unless you want to pay to go swimming, which now is normally closed in the winter too. So I think that we really lack services and opportunities for the kids. I see them bike riding on both sides of the road in the city of Brentwood, not following rules or guidelines or structure or anything like that. So my thing is, the more that we could offer them as a resident that lives literally right there, I think it's important. I think it's great to see kids, especially through this pandemic. They had nothing to do. These kids, the park was the only place they could go because it was open. They couldn't go into facilities. They had to study at home. These kids were closed in, and a lot more kids became bikers and skaters because of that. They found something to do, and the parents just wanted to get them out of the house. So I think that, obviously, I know we still have to do our due diligence and going in the community, but I'm one of the residents that live right there that I think that this is a great opportunity.
But you don't live across the street from it.
All right, so let's keep moving here. So that was our last project. So this particular slide and the next slide just show all of these potential projects along with the costs and the resources that are needed. And I have another slide here that just summarizes all of these initiatives. So the ones on the left are the existing strategic initiatives that our department is still working on through another year. So these are ongoing and will be completed during this next strategic planning cycle. And then the ones on the right are the additional projects that we just spoke of, and they have the cost numbers with them as well. So that, I think, completes my presentation. And we did a lot of questions and answers throughout, but I will stay here if there's additional questions and answers.
Bruce, if you could do one thing.
Sure.
I know that there were a lot more strategic initiatives that from 2 years ago. Do you have just off the top of your head some of the ones that you were able to accomplish already from the last strategic
Well,
initiative?
there are several things that are still ongoing. So ones that were accomplished, we do have disc golf. So that's a new one that is out at Creekside Park that we move forward with. And a lot of these other short-term initiatives are in process right now. So a lot of the other ones are not completed, but we are working on a lot of these things. Adaptive recreation, we have a consultant on board that is evaluating our programs for accessibility and adaptive recreation needs. So there are a lot of things that are happening as we speak, and we're excited to continue to work with the council and our residents on new projects as well, given we have the resources to be able to bring these things forward.
Well, I just want you to know how much I appreciate. I know the council has said so in the past also. Actually getting things moving forward and getting things done for a long time. It was a bit of a frustration in our community. And now there are physical things that we see happening. And I also appreciate you keeping in mind the all-ability nature of all of the new things going forward to making it as accessible as possible to our residents with all abilities or disabilities. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Can we take a quick 5-minute